What if the richest family in China never appears on any rich list? What if the records exist, but vanish behind red lines and blacked out screens? Tonight we follow a paper trail that many tried to seal. We trace reported fortunes tied to China's most powerful name and the secrecy that surrounds them. To understand the allegations, start with a title: Princeling. Children of China's revolutionary elite, raised near the levers of power, grown in the shadow of the party. As markets opened in the 1980s and 90s, opportunity rushed in. State factories spun into private hands, land deals bloomed, resources moved from command to commodity. This was fertile ground for savvy entrepreneurs, for well-placed families, and for blurred lines. In 2012, Bloomberg reporters combed through thousands of corporate filings. They mapped a web of companies tied to relatives of Xi Jinping. Not Xi himself, they stressed, relatives. They found stakes in real estate projects, minerals, and investments worth hundreds of millions of dollars on paper. Land titles in Hong Kong and Shenzhen. Positions in companies created during China's go-go growth years. Public records, shareholder logs, prospectuses, the dry dust of bureaucracy that tells a very human story. One name recurs in those records: Xi's older sister, Qi Chaochao. Another, her husband, Deng Jiagui. Their names, or their known aliases, appear in filings connected to property firms and resources ventures. Some dealings involved rare earths, the metals underlying modern electronics. Others sat in prime urban soil as China's cities leapt skyward. Another branch leads offshore. The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists later highlighted companies in the British Virgin Islands linked to some relatives. Offshore firms are legal. They can also signal a desire for discretion. Layers between the asset and the name. Layers between the name and the country. Reporters were careful. They repeated a crucial point. There was no evidence Xi himself owned these assets. No direct holdings in his name. No signature on the deeds. But families in China often avoid formal ownership. They use trusted hands: a cousin, a sibling, a son-in-law. In Chinese business slang, a white glove, clean fingers for a dirty task, or simply discretion in a system where power and market often overlap. Journalists piece together the mosaic: a property here, a mining license there, options granted, shares transferred, positions assigned, then resigned. A portfolio stitched through time. Then, a twist. As Xi climbed toward the top, traces of those assets began to fade. Some companies were sold, others were restructured. Holdings were divested, according to filings reviewed by reporters. A house changes hands. A director steps down. The paper trail thins. By the time Xi took the helm, much of the public footprint tied to key relatives had shrunk or gone quiet. Coincidence? Prudent housekeeping before the spotlight? Or pressure from an incoming anti-corruption drive determined to clean the family porch first? Meanwhile, the stories themselves hit a wall in China. Bloomberg's site went dark behind the Great Firewall after its report. The New York Times, which published a parallel investigation into another top leader's family wealth, was also blocked. Search terms vanished from Chinese platforms. Social media posts were scrubbed within minutes. Names turned into numbers and code words to slip past censors. Inside newsrooms, the chill was real. Editors faced warnings. Reporters felt doors close. Sources went silent. The message was clear. Some fortunes may exist on paper. They may not exist in conversation. Why does this matter? Because power and money move together. Because private wealth in the ruling circle can shape public policy. Because anti-corruption promises ring differently if families prosper quietly in the background. Supporters of the leadership argue that relatives are private citizens. They say business activity by family members is not proof of wrongdoing. They note that reporting showed no direct holdings by Xi. They point to official campaigns that have felled thousands of corrupt cadres and tycoons. They say the system is being cleaned from within. Skeptics reply that opacity is the point. Asset disclosures for top leaders remain secret. Independent watchdogs have little access. Courts are controlled by the party. And when journalists test the boundary, the historical pattern is familiar. In imperial courts, fortunes clustered around the throne. In revolutionary states, privilege found new lanes. When markets opened, capital flowed along old networks of trust. Access is advantage. Information is currency. A handshake can be worth more than a bank loan. Follow the techniques used to keep wealth off stage. Use of relatives and schoolmates as nominal owners. Shares parked in holding companies with bland names. Offshore shells that own onshore firms through a chain of custody. Loans between friends that become equity by another name. Each step legal in isolation. Together, a fog machine. And yet the fog leaks light. Corporate registries list directors and shareholders. Property records list owners. IPO prospectuses describe related party risks. Court filings detail disputes between partners when deals sour. These are the breadcrumbs reporters followed. These are the breadcrumbs censors try to sweep. The stakes are bigger than one family. They touch on how a modern superpower manages private wealth inside a one-party state. They ask whether anti-corruption can be both a political weapon and a genuine cleanup. They test whether transparency can survive where secrecy is policy. The story continues to evolve. Relatives age, companies merge, new names appear as nominees, old names retire, investigations flare and fade. What remains constant is the architecture. Power at the top, opportunity in the marketplace, a culture of discretion, and the high price of asking hard questions. We may never see a balance sheet with every line item and every beneficiary. We may never read the full minutes of who decided what and when. But the public records that do exist whisper a consistent tale, that in the modern history of China, proximity to power has often meant proximity to wealth, and that telling this story is a struggle between those who gather facts and those who guard the gates. So how does wealth move without leaving a trail? It doesn't. It leaves faint ones, faded, split across borders, buried in paperwork, and scattered among people who almost never speak in public. Start with the building blocks: a holding company here, a nominee shareholder there, a trust in a jurisdiction that asks few questions, an operating firm that does the real work. Layer by layer, name by name, the lines blur. In China's reform era, the children of revolutionaries entered the marketplace. They had connections. They learned the rules fast. They invested in land when land was cheap. They took stakes in mines when the world was buying. They partnered with state firms where decisions carried the weight of the party. They understood how to stand close to the valve where credit flowed. Public records from the 1990s and 2000s show a pattern. Relatives of senior cadres appearing as directors or shareholders, sometimes briefly, sometimes through intermediaries. Names would surface in regional registries, then vanish after restructurings. Deals would pass through private placements, discreet, lucrative, mostly invisible to ordinary citizens. In 2012, one of the few global outlets to map this ecosystem drew a sharp line. It reported significant holdings tied to relatives of China's new top leader. Assets in real estate, in minerals, in finance, worth hundreds of millions by its accounting. And it made a careful point. It found no evidence that the leader himself owned the assets. No proof he intervened on their behalf. But the proximity was the story. The reaction was swift. Websites carrying the report were blocked in China. Mentions on social media were scrubbed. Search results turned blank. Inside the country, the piece existed only in fragments. Screenshots circulated in private chats. Those too disappeared. The trail did not end there. The next wave came from offshore leaks, corporate documents from tax havens, filed by agents a world away. They showed shell companies set up in the Caribbean by businessmen with familiar ties. Names that matched reported in-laws. Names that matched siblings by marriage. The filings did not prove wrongdoing. They showed arrangements. They showed a readiness to use the same financial tools used by global elites everywhere. They also showed how easily ownership can be distanced from its beneficiaries. Look at the architecture. A BVI company holds shares in a mainland entity. A Hong Kong intermediary manages the bank account. On paper, the director is a trusted associate. or a lawyer, or a relative with a low profile. In practice, signatures follow family lines, decisions follow meetings held behind closed doors, and profits flow in ways that are legal on their face, but obscure in their effect. Property tells its own tale. Local registries in Hong Kong once listed full details of buyers and directors. Reporters could cross-check names. They could map holding firms to apartment towers and suburban villas. They found luxury units linked to companies run by relatives. They found timing that aligned with market peaks. They found mortgages that suggested deep access to credit. And then, over time, access to those registries tightened. Personal details were masked. Searches became harder. The past remained, but the future records dimmed. On the mainland, disclosure has always been limited. State media do not profile private wealth of top families. Private media know the invisible lines not to cross. Censors issue notices with simple commands. Do not reprint. Do not amplify. Delete at once. Foreign platforms are filtered. Domestic platforms are monitored. And the people with knowledge know to keep their heads down. There is also the calendar. Moments of political transition concentrate risk. Before leadership handovers, stakes change hands. Positions are resigned. Shareholdings are transferred to partners, or to entities that are harder to trace. Public filings show these movements in the aggregate. A name strikes through one quarter. A new name appears the next. It looks ordinary. It may be ordinary, but the clustering around sensitive dates is a pattern that invites questions. Add the anti-corruption campaign to the mix. It is real. It is far-reaching. It has jailed powerful figures and dismantled networks. It has also sorted friends from rivals. Those under investigation become cautionary tales. Those untouched become examples of discipline. The message is twofold. No one is above the rules, and the rules flow from the center. What does any of this say about one family? It says they live inside a system built to protect the core. It says relatives navigate opportunities that arise from status. It says outside observers must piece together evidence from shards. A filing here, a contract there, a property registry page saved before it was edited, a business card slipped into a pocket after a banquet. And it says something about risk, not just for journalists, for bankers who underwrite the deals, for auditors who sign off on statements they cannot fully verify, for partners who join ventures they cannot fully control, for bureaucrats who approve licenses and hope not to be blamed later. In such an environment, discretion is a survival skill. There is a contradiction at the heart of this story. A party that speaks of purity and people's service. A market that rewards those with the best information. A legal system that punishes graft. And a political culture that regards family matters as state secrets. These things can coexist for a time. They strain against each other, yet the documents that do surface say enough. They show that family networks have participated in China's rise as owners and financiers. They show that transparency has receded where it would reveal too much. They show that international scrutiny comes in waves. A blockbuster investigation, a censorship response, a tightening of rules, and then a new leak from a different jurisdiction. This is not unique to China. Elites everywhere shield assets. They use trusts and shells. They exploit soft spots in disclosure. But in China, the stakes are higher. Power is more concentrated, dissent is more costly, and the distance between personal wealth and national interest is harder to measure. So the question becomes practical. How do citizens know who benefits? How do investors price unseen influence? How do foreign governments assess risk when negotiating with a state where family and office can blur? The answers are partial. They come from painstaking work. They come from brave sources. They come from the mathematics of ownership. And they come, sometimes, from mistakes made by those who believe no one was watching. In the end, the picture is not a portrait. It is a mosaic. Some tiles gleam. Some are missing. The outline is recognizable, even if the details remain hidden. And behind the glass, the keepers of the gallery decide who gets to look, and for how long. But sometimes the gallery door slams. In 2012,